Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm Sean Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com and host of Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. You can find more episodes of this podcast at MindYourFarmBusiness.com. Working with people is critical as a leader. There are high moments and low moments in any relationship with friends, family, employees, customers, and suppliers. Understanding your own personality and the personality of others can alleviate some roadblocks in any relationship. You need to look outward and inward at personality tendencies to understand where someone is coming from. So how do we do this? The answer is standardized personality testing. This allows a real scientific understanding of how and why people react to a given situation and what essentially makes that person tick. Today's topic on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast is all about standardized personality tests and how they assist you in being a leader. Additionally, we'll talk about how they can form the base of your family or team to work better as a group. Today's guest is Todd Miller. Todd is the CEO of TEC Canada. TEC operates in 20 countries around the world. Members meet in private advisory groups every month under the same guiding principles to help one another become better leaders, make better decisions, and achieve better results. Let's get to the conversation and talk about personality testing with Todd Miller. Joined right now on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast by Todd Miller. He is the CEO of TEC Canada. Todd, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sean. Pleasure to be here.
So, Todd, today we're going to talk about personality tests, assessments. There's a number of them out there, and we'll probably get into some of that here in a little bit. But I know this is something that you have studied a lot, you've used a lot at TEC Canada. Why would somebody or a company or a group of people, why would they need to do a personality assessment? What is the purpose of it?
Yeah, no, it's interesting when you think about personality, and there's probably at least three defining characteristics of any one of us as human beings, and one of them happens to be personality. For me, personality became directly linked to culture. And organizations are very familiar with, the conversation about having great culture. They'll always say, they're working on culture or what have you. And one of the elements, quite frankly, and I would argue that the element of formalizing great culture is behavior. And when you think about behaviors being aligned with your core values of an organization, the behaviors are all linked to the personalities. So when you're thinking about, a personality assessment of any one of us, we all have a personality, and in the model that I'm familiar with and have spent a lot of time with, it's DISC, and there's many out there, but in DISC, the DISC assessment tool, it will do, in essence, after about 12 minutes of anybody participating in it, you will have a very defined trait of what your personality is made up with. And of course, that all comes about from the perspective of, number one, being self-aware of who I am as a person. Number two, if I want to have a better connection with another human being, which I would argue most of us want to have, then how do I apply personality to work with another person to have a more engaging experience?
And it's not just about the traits that you have in that personality, but also the traits that maybe are weaknesses. You're lacking them, because we tend to identify, that person he's a thinker, or he sees the big picture, or that person likes the details. But there's also what they're kind of missing part that's also very fascinating.
Well, perfect. Yeah, exactly, Sean. So when I think about it, this is not a personality assessment tools is not some kind of a scorecard that says, well, you're better than I am. So as I always say, it's not good, bad, right, wrong. It's really about self-awareness. And then if you have a desire, so step number two, if you have a desire to have a better connection with another human being, Then you build an action plan. So self-awareness, number one, and the personality assessment tool tells you all of your great traits, which we all have unbelievable traits. And by the way, we have traits that involve every single element of a personality assessment tool. So it's not as if we're pigeonholed into one area. But then, of course, the next thing is that, okay, well, how do I relate to Sean? And how do I? So number one, I have to be aware of who I am as a person. Number two is I have to, understand and appreciate Sean approaches things differently. This example. So how do I have a more meaningful connection with him? And in that regard, you have to go all the way to the other person to honor and respect, who they are as a person. And the byproduct of that is a more meaningful relationship.
This sounds like something that could work very well in a work environment, but also with family, because it's a different environment, but it's really the same. It's the same principles.
It's a tool, right? I mean, any personality assessment tool that's out there, and there's many of them. And again, obviously, I'm partial to the one that we've picked is DISC, and largely because I find it to be a very simple tool to understand, but yet very complex in terms of its database, and so it's very robust in terms of its description of how it engages with other individuals. To your point, it's designed specifically for the workplace. And you can think about that in the context of, organizations wanting to have a more meaningful and engaging and better culture from a workplace perspective. But those same elements, as to your point, are very much part of everyday life. So families, as a matter of fact, I've done work with many individuals and communities where they've used it within their family environment, trying to understand, how to have a more meaningful relationship with my spouse, or how to have a better connection with my kids as they get older. And again, the tool is very effective in that regard.
One of the benefits that I could see, Todd, is it's in a company when there is, say, low amounts of pressure in a given day or week. It's a little bit easier for people to get along, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's in that moment of pressure, that timeline, trying to hit some of those milestones for our audience. It's planting and harvest, where it's really, really go time. Mm-hmm. This is where understanding not only your own behaviors and personality, but the ones that you're working with, that's where it really can benefit, because you understand where people are coming from in those high pressure moments.
Yeah, no question. And it would be nice to think that life is just filled with calmness and none of these pressure points that you're describing, but that's clearly not reality. So that's why a tool like DISC or personality assessment tools are even more effective, because we know that there's moments in life where we're dealing with a situation that it's a little more tense, or maybe it's a lot tense, or there's problems that need to be solved. Or we're just trying to have a connection. So those would be those calm moments in life, which may be the easier ones to deal with, whether they be in the family environment or the workplace environment. But when you need to solve problems, right, or you really are in a tense situation, what is your tool? What are the things you can go to that help you through navigate those conversations of conflict, or how do I have a more engaging conversation with another person? Trying to get to, as I say, my definition of leadership is influencing outcomes. And by that definition, we're all trying to influence an outcome. So what tools can I put in my toolkit, personality assessment tools being one of them, to make sure that I have a more engaging and meaningful relationship with another person?
Let's get into a little bit more of the detail here and what forms these personality types that you would get out of a DISC profile. And by the way, everybody, I'm an ID is how I was identified in DISC. And as you read through it, you're like, yep, that's me. Pretty accurate. That fits me to a T. What forms that? Is it our all life experiences? Does it tend to be our early childhood? What creates this and forms this?
Yeah, so it's very interesting, right? Unlike things that we could maybe blame on our parents of our genetic, our height, or all these, quite frankly, even our IQ, we could all of that could be deemed to be things that are, call it birthright, if you will. When it comes to personality, it's very interesting. All the smart psychologists that have worked on this for for many years, have clearly come up with the consensus that in our early development, now the only thing that is a little vague in their expertise is that some will tell you between 0 and 9, others will tell you 0 and 12 years of age, your personality is formed. So if we just pause for a minute there and think about that for a second, it's pretty clear that as a child in their early stages, they're very influenced by mom and dad. But of course, as time goes on, they become more and more influenced by their external surroundings. If they're playing sports, or they're getting involved, if they're getting involved with their school activities, or so you can just think about all of the different elements that start influencing that personality trait. So somewhere, let's use 12 years old. By the time that the child, any one of us, hits 12 years old, we've formed a personality. And as you're alluding to, an ID is, of course, in the DISC model. If you can imagine a circle, the circumflex, and there's 4 key personality types. So there's a dominance personality, the D, influence, steadiness being the S, or conscientiousness being the C. So if you imagine those DISC around the circle, and of course your dot or your personality is suddenly it shows up after doing a test with the personality assessment tool, and suddenly you have a dot, and otherwise known as your personality. And as you're alluding to, yours is an ID, and again, not good, bad, right, wrong. It's just a starting point of self-awareness that you show up naturally as an ID that would have the traits of the 8 traits around the circle. You would have the trait of enthusiasm and action and results. And for those that know you, Sean, they'd probably all say, oh yeah, that's who Sean is. He's enthusiastic, and he's action-oriented, and he's results-oriented as well. That doesn't mean that you don't have the other elements. So just so that we share the other traits: collaboration, support, stability, accuracy, and challenge are the other making up all the traits around the circumflex.
Can your personality, or where that dot lands, can that shift and move based on time and experiences, and sort of you get some years under your belt, so to speak?
Yeah, it's an age-old dialogue that I have with many people that have been involved with this assessment tool. And DISC, by the way, the folks that are involved with this, they've tested hundreds of thousands. I've certainly tested thousands, and I've retested some that have some individuals that have said, "Oh, I'm not so sure I agree with my assessment tool." So not to argue, but to confirm that. To your point, that personality really doesn't change. So your dot doesn't change in the context of this model. And it might shift slightly. So in your case, you might be an ID today, and you might be D dominant tomorrow. So you might be DI. So it might have a slight shift, but your personality, I have never witnessed somebody's personality shifting from, in your case, an ID down to say an S. That's just not going to happen. Having said that, here's the part that I think everyone needs to appreciate, is that as you use this tool, you learn those other traits, and you learn how to, as we were talking about earlier on, when you're dealing with problems or things get tense. The whole tool is based on the premise of you moving to somebody else's personality. So if you're dealing with somebody that has an S dominant personality or a steadiness personality, and they're all about support and stability, and they come up against you, Sean, that might not be a natural fit. But you, because you're using this tool, you understand that you can, work your personality towards them, because you're really wanting to make sure that you have an engaging, great connection with that other human being. So by doing that, you actually start showing up as an S personality. But that's just because you're using the tool. That didn't mean that you actually moved your dot, as we're referring to in this model. Your personality still is an ID.
We'll get back to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, but first a word from our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank.
This episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. As an agricultural producer, you're putting a lot of thought into your operation every day. You probably have more than a couple of ideas on how to handle challenges, like market fluctuations, unexpected weather, or simply weighing the pros and cons of adopting new technology. But knowing where to start? That's where a solid risk management strategy can help. Visit rbc.com/risk management to learn more.
This is an interesting point about you moving to other people, as opposed to expecting everybody move to you. That's a key. Those are two similar things, but very different.
Yeah, it's the part that a lot of folks will get hung up on. And if you start with this element of saying, look, I really want to have I want to have a great connection with this other human being, whether it be my boss, my direct reports, my colleagues, my wife, whoever that person is in life. If you're really trying to, I just want to have a more engaging, meaningful connection with that human being. Well, the rule of thumb here, using DISC, you have to move all the way to them. There can't be an expectation of, this 50-50 relationship that we hear, I'll meet you in the middle, as they say. That's not what this tool is designed for. It's really based on you going all the way to have a really engaging, meaningful conversation with that other person based on their personality, not based on yours. And that's when the magic happens within this tool. And it's interesting, right? People will say to me, well, but Sean's working with a tool, and as Todd is as well. So shouldn't we both be trying to get to the middle? Well, by natural extension, we would be both doing that if we're using the tool. But it's not. You can't use this tool with the premise that we're going to meet in the middle. It's about you going all the way to the other person. And as I say to folks, because guys and gals will tell me that sounds like a lot of work. And I say, well, it is, but it's very meaningful work if you want to have a more meaningful relationship with that other person.
And we all know relationships are hard. There's just nothing easy. If you continue to live by the premise that relationships of any type are easy, boy, you're gonna have a hard time, and probably not have a lot of really, really solid relationships. I think that's just sort of rules to live by. What was interesting when we did with you DISC assessments with the entire RealAgriculture team, some sort of aha moments based on what you just said was that you kind of realize two things. One, some of your behaviors that are creating bad uncomfortableness with team members, like putting people in positions they're very just sort of like, where there's that sort of like a lightness of breath, and making people uncomfortable as a leader can be a positive, but I'm talking about more of the negative. But people also understand as a leader where you are coming from as well. That's the other part. It's this firmer understanding of the root of some of the behaviors that we have that really create that a little bit more of a solid team, I think, that deeper connection.
Well, excellent, because that's exactly when you think about the context of this tool, Sean, and as you and your team did, by virtue of everyone participating, you have a group of people that are all engaged with self-awareness, as I say, and then they all have a desire to have more meaningful relationships with each other. So by using the tool, everyone's using and building action plans to have better connections. And this appreciation that comes out of the exercise that you're describing, which has really attracted me to this work over the last 15 years, I guess. And when I think about groups coming together and suddenly, as you say, have that aha moment that, that's why you show up like that, Sean. I didn't appreciate that, but by disclosing everyone's personality and literally seeing everyone's dots, if you will, on the circumflex, and starting to gain an appreciation for how people naturally show up when things get tense or when you're trying to have a more meaningful connection, suddenly you've got everyone kind of working to a common path, to a common goal, if you will. And that, again, at the beginning of our conversation, why I really love this work is it's all about culture. And, my strong belief is that, culture is not a thing. I hear this often with organizations. They'll say, we're working on culture. Well, you're really not working on culture, because culture exists in every environment, good or bad, regardless of whether you've done personality assessments or anything. You have a culture. We've all gone to an event, I'm sure, where you've shown up and you thought, this doesn't feel right. And what you're feeling is a culture that doesn't align with who you are. And if you think about, well, what does that mean, align with who I am? Well, it's about your beliefs or your core values. And the element that connects core values or beliefs to culture is behavior. And personality assessment tools are all about behavior.
And I think sometimes people make this assumption that this idea of culture is only important in the corporate world. And in the world of more practical occupations, construction, farming, ranching, where we're getting things done on a regular basis, culture really doesn't play. We're task oriented. That's just not true.
Yeah, well, I would obviously argue that point that everywhere you go, whether it be in the construction, manufacturing, professional, I mean, you name the industry, and quite frankly, even name organizations, hockey teams, soccer teams, baseball teams, communities, churches, everywhere you go, a culture exists. And if you ask somebody, well, what type of a culture would you want to be part of? They'll name it. They'll start saying things like, well, I want to be in an engaging culture. I want to be participative. I want it to be friendly. I want to be enthusiastic. They'll give you characteristics, and every human being will be able to describe the type of environment or culture that they want to be part of. So that takes us back to the question of, oh, okay, that's interesting. So how would you have to behave in order to show up in that way? Well, I'd have to do what's right even when nobody's watching if I wanted to have a culture full of integrity, right? So just to give one example, but I absolutely believe that every single environment, regardless of profession, industry, community, family, even, they have a culture, and it really is a question of what kind of culture do you want.
Now, Todd, you've gone through this with a lot of different organizations. Mm-hmm. Our team at RealAgriculture found it exceptionally beneficial. We still talk about it in our team meetings. Do you have experiences where it doesn't go well? And I guess if it doesn't go well, what does that actually speak to in terms of the relationship with the people?
Well, unfortunately, I not a lot of times, but I've been in environments where it's discounted, right? What we've just talked about here in the last few minutes is discounted in terms of, I don't see how that works. And in those environments, 9 out of 10 times, it's driven because the leadership of that organization, because this is top down, right? If leadership doesn't want to participate in working on behaviors that are associated with core values or belief structures driving towards the culture that, quite frankly, they deserve, if they don't want to do that heavy lifting or don't want to utilize this tool or believe that it's just something interesting, I kind of looked at it, then they really do need to find a different tool. When people actually embrace this tool and embrace the whole notion of personality assessments and how closely aligned behaviors are to culture, I have never seen it fail when people are actually prepared to do that heavy lifting. When they're not prepared to do that, in other words, they kind of look at it as, it's something out there that, they've kind of read or, reviewed, but they really don't see the connection. Most times it's not the connection of personality or behaviors. They're really not living their core values. I mean, back in the day, they used to put core values up on the wall and say, oh, we're a company of, and they'd have these flashy words up there. But the real question is, well, how do you live those words, right? How do you demonstrate them? And that's behavior. So that's the true linkage to personality.
In DISC, we have 4 quadrants, obviously D, I, S, and C. Mm-hmm. Does a team have to feature people from all of those 4 quadrants?
In terms of the makeup of the organization,
yeah.
I'm assuming that's what, look, I mean, I honestly believe that the more diversity that you can have in life, including personality, I think the better. Obviously society is spending a lot of time for all the right reasons these days talking about diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. And so I would hold it in the same regard to personality. If you can have a nice blend of all the different personality types, even better. If you can do that, having said that, is it essential? No. We don't use DISC as a hiring tool. We use it as, once you're all together as a community, that's when we want to understand who are all the people that are around the table. And regardless of whether you've surrounded yourself with a bunch of dominant D individuals, or I or S or C, you can make it work. Because again, remember, this is about behaviors and making sure that your behaviors are aligned to your beliefs and core values. And as long as you're following that, you can make any personality, mix work within any environment.
Todd, thank you so much for joining us here on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. This has been fantastic. We could talk for hours about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean. It was a pleasure working with you and your team, and it's been a pleasure talking with you today, and thank you.
Personally, when our own team went through a workshop with Todd, I found that it improved the manner in which I approach individuals on our team in praise, in conflict, or coaching moments. The results have been dramatic for me personally, and I've seen substantially improved communication with others. Why? Because I think I better understand my tendencies and the personality of others. One of the moments of discussion with Todd Miller that sticks out to me is the idea of going the full way to the other person. Don't attempt to meet in the middle, as the saying goes. This is a topic that I would love to really dive deeper into in future Mind Your Farm Business podcast episodes. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. If you have any feedback or comments, please email me at shaney@realagriculture.com. Or, of course, you can always call the Real Ag listener line, 855-776-6147. You can find more episodes of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast at mindyourfarmbusiness.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to RBC Royal Bank, and until next time, keep on minding your farm business.